morning, Bayside. How y'all doing? Good. Hey, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers in the room. Can we give it up for all the mothers? Come on. Well, hey, I am joined today by my incredible wife, Caitlin. And yes, you can absolutely cheer for her. I gave her the worst Mother's Day present possible and said, will you come and preach with me on Mother's Day? And yeah. So for those of you that don't know her, this is not what she normally does. She is an incredible nurse and mother to our 2 children. So would you just guys give her a warm welcome this morning, being up here on stage?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Just bear with me. I'm very out of my comfort zone this morning, so a little nervous. As Mason said, I'm a nurse, and I have the honor of working on a postpartum department in our hospital, so that means I work with moms and babies all the time. So Mother's Day is kind of a big deal in my line of work. So yay, Mother's Day. But that being said, with the nature of the job I have, I realize that Mother's Day comes with a multitude of emotions, from joy and happiness, but sometimes pain and heartache. So today, if you find yourself still longing to become a mother, if you have a strained relationship with your mom or your children, or even if you're still grieving the loss of your mom or child, we just want you to know that we see where you're at today, and all emotions are welcome, and we hope that you can find some encouragement from our message this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we fully dive into today's passage, we also just want to take a moment to say that the 2 of us are really only up here today because of our incredible moms who have poured into us. In fact, you can absolutely clap for that. In fact, they were the true heroes in our life this week. As grandmas, they took care of our kids the last 5 days. We were in Colorado for a friend of mine's wedding. So thank you to our moms. At our house, they're known affectionately as Yaya and Mimi. So thank you both. But today, we're diving into Acts chapter 27. We get this. We've been in the book of Acts forever. And the end is next month. We are so... Not that you're sad to see it go, I know, but... if you remember from last week, we pick up with Paul. He had been accused and tried before the governor of the governor of Judea, the Roman governor, named Felix. And Felix locks up Paul in prison for 2 years and eventually passes him on to the next governor. And then what Paul does next is he makes an appeal to Caesar. So it's something you could do as a Roman citizen where you could be like, listen, I want to have my case tried by Caesar. And so Acts chapter 27 is picking up where Paul is being transported from prison to Caesar's palace. And we kind of pick up in the journey of this travel. So if you have your Bibles, you can open to Acts chapter 27. If not, it's going to be on the screen behind me. And it says this: when it was decided that he would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship from Adramyttium about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. I really should have had you read all these words. But the next day, we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so they might provide for his needs. From there, we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. You guys know all of these locations, I know. There, the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salmon. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now it was after the Day of Atonement, which would have been sometime in October. So Paul warned them, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo and to our lives also." But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete facing southwest and northwest. Okay, I want to give you guys a little map for some contextualization of everything you just heard, because I know you're like, what just happened. So I got a map. We'll start up on the screen. So Paul's journey would have started down here in the bottom right-hand side. I'm sure you can all read this. He would have started down here, sailed up to Sidon, and then they went around Cyprus and over to Myra, out to Cnidus, and then they came down, and the winds would have pushed them on this side of Crete. And they pick up in this Fair Havens area, and they're trying to get up to Phoenix. Now, this is a map of all of Acts chapter 27, so we're going to get over this in the next 3 weeks. But this is kind of the beginning of their journey, and there's a reason all of this matters, okay? Because you might just read this and be like, this just sounds like a lot of names for no reason. But as Luke is writing this story, he wants to make it clear that this is something that really happened. This is historical fact. This isn't some myth or fable about some guy sailing in some sea or some port somewhere in the world. So he's anchoring it in something that is very, very real. And over the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at this entire journey. Eventually, they end up in a shipwreck and the things that come afterwards. So you don't want to miss out on the next couple weeks. But today's passage kind of leaves us with a little bit of a cliffhanger, okay? Where it's like, okay, they're going to set out, and Paul kind of says, maybe we shouldn't do this, but they decide to do it anyway. And we're left with this cliffhanger. But I think there's still a lot in this for us today, especially on Mother's Day, because I don't know if anything sums up being a mother more than sailing through a storm, right? So today, we're going to be looking at 4 lessons for riding out the storms in your life, okay? We all go through storms. And the first thing we have to do is we have to accept the season that we are in. This is honestly one of the most difficult things to do as a parent, or really in any area of your life. But as a parent, there are seasons of parenting that are just harder than others. Not that there are any easy seasons of parenting, but there are definitely seasons of parenting that are harder than others.
Yeah, a hard season that we've went through now twice is after I returned back to work after maternity leave with Anders and Brinley, both our kids. It was finding a new balance in our home and in our life. And what does that look like? And what does it look like for me to hold 2 things that I love, my career and my kids? And how do I do both well? And am I doing them well? And all those questions that come along with that season.
Yeah. And even if you're not a parent, right, this is still true. Like, there are seasons of life that are more difficult than others. There are seasons of work that are more difficult than others, or of school and college that are more difficult. And one of the worst things that we can do in these difficult seasons is ignore the reality of where we are, right? Like, we've got to be realistic about where we find ourselves in life. And we see here, there are 3 people in this story who are not being very realistic about where they found themselves. It was the centurion, the pilot of the ship, and the owner of the ship. They underestimated the danger of the season that they were in. Paul was like, by the way, when Paul was warning them about the sea, this isn't some sort of like prophetic message. Paul's just like, I've traveled a lot, and it's the end of October, and this is when you don't sail. Like, this is just wise advice, right? But the centurion and the boat owner and the pilot are like, hey, but there's a small favorable breeze in our direction, so we're gonna head off. We're gonna do it. And when we're in difficult seasons, we have to make sure that we don't act like that. We don't ignore the facts about where we are. I mean, take a look at your life right now. Like, if you are a parent in here and your kids are under the age of 4 years old, you are in a stormy season, right? You just are. If you're a parent in here and you have teenagers, you are in a stormy season. If you're a parent in here and you're an empty nester, or you're about to be an empty nester, calm waters ahead, right? I'm kidding. You're probably, if we're honest, empty nesters, you're probably about to enter a season of being worried about the storms that are happening hundreds of miles away, right? Where your kids are off at school. It's difficult. But there's a truth we have to hang on to in the middle of these stormy seasons. The first one is this: don't be surprised when the stormy season starts, okay? Troubles are going to come. Jesus was very clear in his Gospels. He was like, listen, following me, yes, it's amazing. But troubles are going to come your way as you follow me. We know that our eternity is secure. But Jesus doesn't mince words about the fact that we will face problems in our life. I once heard someone say, you're either going into a storm, you're in the middle of a storm, or you're coming out of a storm. That is the circle of life, which I know is super encouraging for all of you to hear, right? But here's the thing. We're all going to enter these storms. And another truth we need to realize in these storms is, don't make the mistake of thinking that storms will last forever. They don't. Stormy seasons come to an end in our life. And I think one of the things we end up doing with difficult seasons of our life is we spend so much time and energy in the middle of it, worrying about it, fretting about it, trying to get through it, that when the stormy season actually ends, all we do is sit there and reminisce about all the hard things that we went through. And we don't actually take a moment to spend some gratitude about the season that God has us in between difficult times, where we go, hey, the waters are calmer than they used to be, right? Things are a little bit easier right now. All we do is we're like, it was so hard, it was so hard, it was so hard. And then the next storm comes, and we're like, oh, man, I'm back in the middle of it again. So we've got to find that gratitude when we are in the seasons that don't have storms. And we also have to hold on to that reality that stormy seasons do come to an end. But there's also great purpose in the difficult seasons. And the book of James talks about the problems and the trials that we face and really has some amazing wisdom. I want to read this for you. James chapter 1, starting in verse 2. It says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." That's probably one of the most convicting verses in the Bible, right? I'm like, I don't feel any joy when the problems come. He goes, "Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything." James really gives us here 4 facts of life that you need to know, and they are.
Yeah, the first one are problems are inevitable. Moms, we know this. Everyone has a diaper bag full of the extra change of clothes and the extra diapers because the blowouts are inevitable. And not only are they inevitable, but problems can be unpredictable. Those said blowouts are always unpredictable. I fondly remember back standing on the side of I-5 holding a poop-covered child, trying to hose down in the car seat and all the things because that blowout certainly was unpredictable. And thirdly, problems are varied. So yes, we have problems with our children, but we can also have problems with work, with our career. Where am I going? What am I doing? Conflict. We can have varied problems within our relationships with loved ones, with our friends, with our family. And then again, for Mother's Day, back to kids, we can have problems with just the weighted decisions, the hard decisions we have to make as parents. How do I parent my child how they need, to their specific needs? How do I encourage them to face their own problems? How do I step back and hold my tongue and let them figure out that maybe my warning was valid and you might fall off the step I warned you about? Maybe that's just our home, I don't know. Anyway, all sorts of problems can arise.
Yeah, and lastly, these problems, and this is the really important part, these problems can be developmental. James says, realize that they come, and then he says, to produce in you. And this is so important because the only wasted problem in life is the one that you don't learn from or develop from. We hire Apex interns every summer. They're high schoolers that come and work with us for 8 weeks and run everything going on. And I always tell them at the beginning of the year, I expect you to fail. Because if you're not failing, then you're not trying hard enough outside of what you know you can do. And I said, I don't care about the fact that you fail. What I care about is, what did you learn, right? How are you going to respond to that failure? And we can look at every great entrepreneur in history, right? And their story usually includes a moment where they go, I had my biggest failure in life. Right? The first company they launched blew up. They went in debt, whatever it may be. And they go, I could have let that become the discouraging part. I could have let discouragement take over. But instead, I used that to develop me into something greater. Every challenge that you're facing at work, every struggle that you go through in your marriage, every health problem that you're battling with your doctor with, is actually an opportunity for you to be developed in this season as long as you let that development happen. Don't waste the stormy seasons. We have to accept the season that we're in, and then we have to let it grow and develop us. Now, the second thing we learn from Paul here in these stormy seasons is that we can only control what you can control, right? Control what you can control. Notice that Paul warned them, right? This is not a good idea. And then we read, but the centurion, instead of listening, did something else, right? We can only control what we can control. And notice that when the storm is coming, we have to be careful, first off, not to accelerate into it, but also not to ignore it. Do you know what Paul does in this moment? He doesn't pick a fight with the centurion or the pilot. He doesn't start arguing with them. He doesn't plan an escape to run away off the ship. He does the only thing he can do in that moment, and that is to speak up and to offer the wisdom that he has. All he can do in that moment is voice his concern. And if we're being honest in this room today, we all have control issues, right?
Do you guys want to know one of Mason's greatest fears? It's when I'm driving and he's in the passenger seat and has no control. And that's why it's happened 3 times in our whole relationship.
It's true. It's true. And her biggest fear is when I'm driving and I don't see the brake lights a mile ahead, and anybody else's wife become a Jedi in that moment, like doing this, like, right? So, yes, it's a miracle we still have a happy marriage, right? But this is a perfect example of life, right? We all want to have control of where we're headed. We don't like when it seems like we don't have control. But the reality is we don't always have control. One of the biggest discoveries for me as a parent was realizing that my kids are not just little clones of me. Like, they might look like that physically, but they are their own person. They make their own choices. And the more I try to control them, the more they actually rebel and push back against me. Here's some wisdom I heard at our sermon prep meeting this week that I just thought was so good. Someone said, when you try to control your kids, you lose influence. When you try to influence your kids, you become a trusted voice in their life, right? There's a balance there that we have to have as parents. And Sharon Miller, in her book, The Cost of Control, she said, the loss of hope does not always look like despair. Sometimes it looks like control. We know we have stopped hoping in God when we take matters into our own hands. I just thought that was so wise. And if you're in this room and you're a parent of a teenager, I just want to speak to you for a minute, because I know you're battling this right now. How much do I try to control my kids? And I want to say, did you know that it is actually normal and healthy for your teenager to be resisting your control on their life? Okay? Take a deep breath. Know that it is normal for your teenager to be pushing back. They're transitioning into adults, okay? This doesn't just happen overnight or in a moment. And they're trying to figure out what it looks like to be independent of you. And of course, there are good ways for teenagers to push back, and there are bad ways for them to push back. But unless you want those teenagers living with you when they're 40 years old, they've got to figure out what independence looks like in their life. It's actually a good sign when they're pushing back against you a little bit.
Yeah, when I was a snotty teenager myself, begging for independence and pushing back and trying to get autonomy over my own decision-making, my dad sat me down and he said, my goal as a parent is to raise you to want to be independent, to want to fly the nest. But to do so, him, need to equip you well for life. I can't just be like, here you go, independence, try it out. You have to set up the stage well.
Yeah. So it's a good thing when those teenagers are seeking that independence. Just take heart in that. But of course, there are times, especially as parents, but in every area of our life, where we do have to have some sort of control. And Paul gives us a great example here of when to speak up, right? When do we try to have control in situations? And the first one is when there is danger. Okay, parents, you're like, don't touch the stove, right? Don't drive recklessly. When your coworker at work is maybe going to hurt somebody else or is doing something immoral, and you're like, this is dangerous. Let me speak up and try to have some sort of control on this situation. Another time when we seek to have control is when others are defenseless. And we actually use our influence and our voice in this world to speak up for and to care for and protect those who can't protect themselves. And then the last one is when the Spirit of God prompts us to have control, to speak up. And this is something that I think a lot of us would like to think happens all the time. We're always like, yes, God told me to say this thing. Here's kind of my go-to on when God calls us to speak. Most of the time when he calls us to speak, he's having us say something we would rather not say, because it's going to cost us something, right? It's going to make us maybe look a little different, or we're speaking truth to power, or in some ways we are going to be vulnerable. And so when God calls us to speak, that is time to speak and to step up. So we're in the storm. We can control what we can control, and we have to make sure that we don't make two key mistakes when we're in the middle of the storm. The first one is we have to make sure we don't accelerate into storms. Some of you see storms coming, you see a problem out on the horizon, and you run towards it. You're like, I love conflict and like I am going to get there before anybody else gets there, right? And what you do is you bring this energy and this passion and this flame to the problem, and you make it like 10 times worse than it would have been if it had come naturally. Notice that Paul doesn't argue, right? He states his case, and then he trusts God. The second thing that we tend to do with storms is we tend to ignore them. And some of you, this might be true, right? Like life gets hard. Crises start happening, and we make it worse by checking out, right? Things are going on at home that we don't want to deal with, and so we just spend time on our phones scrolling instead of actually meeting the needs of our kids or of our spouse. There's a problem at home, and so we decide that, well, actually work really needs me right now, working crazy hours, so we don't go home, right? And here's the thing. When we ignore the storms in our life, we actually make it worse. We've got to show up. We've got to check in even when it's difficult. And then the third thing.
Yeah, the third point we learn is beware of groupthink. So in verse 11 we read, "But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship." So then we can see that the bigger the storm, the more likely we are to fall into groupthink. And what is groupthink? It's when a group prioritizes harmony over honesty. And right now, we have so many voices coming at us from every corner of the world and nation. And women, let's just think back to our baby showers. Okay, fun, exciting, all the things. But commonly, there's little advice cards where all the wise, mature mothers who've come before can write out advice for the young mother-to-be. And that's amazing. That's like an integral part of like stepping into motherhood, is passing on information and passing on advice. But now, not only do we get that from our trusted loved ones, but we can get it from anywhere. I can pull my phone up, log on to any said app, and just get bombarded with advice and how-to. And if you do these 3 steps, your child will sleep through the night at this many age. And all these different things that, yes, they're fun and sometimes are hilarious and make us laugh to the point of almost peeing our pants, ladies. I'm gonna leave it there. And sometimes you can just feel so seen in your season, and you're like, oh my gosh, she is experiencing it, I'm experiencing that. It can almost be a little therapeutic. But the caveat, if we just let these voices fill our head and we're not fact-checking them to God's word and his wisdom and his grace, we can fall prey to letting those words kind of chip away at our confidence. I'll say I, not we, can let the monster of comparison sneak in and grab hold of my heart and my mind, and let it take away that confidence that the Lord has given to me in how to mother my kids exactly how he's instructing me to do so. God gives us the gift of a mother's intuition, and we should not be taking that for granted at all. So how do we avoid all these voices, all these things taking over? First, go to God. Seek his wisdom, seek his word. If you go to James chapter 3, verse 17, we can read the attributes of the type of wisdom he would bestow upon us. It says, "But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere." And then secondly, we don't want to let the wrong group of voices steer us away from the truth that the Lord has placed upon our heart. We want to surround ourselves with a trusted group of wise counsel. We want to seek out God-fearing women who will point us back to all of those attributes of God's wisdom. As I look out into this room right now, I can see a multitude of women who have come alongside me from when I was pregnant with our first, with Anders, who have encouraged me and poured into my life, and who have been that sounding board for me, who have been my wise counsel, who have pointed me back to these attributes many, many times. And I've not only invited them into my life and into my influence, my mind, but influence my kids' lives as well, and our family. So the storm is going to come. We know that now. But who am I going to listen to? Who am I going to allow influence my heart and my mind as I face these storms?
Yeah, that's so good. And then lastly, what we learn from Paul in this passage is that we have to keep our head in all situations, right? Think for a second about how Paul has been handling the last few chapters in Acts. If you haven't been here, he's been calm, cool, and collected in a variety of different situations. And all of these situations are very much against him. He's not just in the middle of chaos. The chaos is directed at him. Excuse me. And yet he's calm. He speaks the truth because his faith is not in himself. It's not in the captain of the ship or the governor that's speaking over him, but his faith in those moments is in Jesus and Jesus alone.
And sometimes I can envy those who stay calm and cool and collected. Now, there are certain situations, I'm your girl. I got my head on straight. I can get through the emergency. But there are other times that I may potentially freak out, or some might say overreact. For example, just the other day, we were getting ready to go to the airport, and we got in the car. We had dropped off the kids and everything, and we got in the car, and Caitlin said, hey, we don't have gum for the flight. And I said, oh, okay, I'll go grab some. I've got some in my truck. I got a big stash in there. And so I jumped out of the car to run to my truck to get some gum, except I had already put the car in reverse on our driveway, and I jumped out. Yeah, and so we have a sloped driveway. So then we started to roll back and into the road. And as this was happening, all I was thinking in my mind was, I think we need to hit the emergency brake. And in my mind, calm, cool, collected thoughts, yes. But out of my mouth flowed, emergency, emergency, emergency. And I was screaming nonsense, just screaming at the top of my lungs. And Mason just silently, calmly, jumps back into the moving vehicle, slams on the brakes, puts it in park, all the things. And two thoughts came to mind in that moment. How did he just jump back into the car? It was literally moving down the driveway. And secondly, how, in God's name, was he completely silent, didn't utter a word? He was so calm, cool, and I'm just over there screaming my head off like a lunatic, doing nothing to help the situation. I was very envious and a little annoyed that you were just silent. I wish you had yelled.
And every guy in the room knows why I was silent, right? I knew I had messed up. I had nothing to say. And so it was just jump in the car, stop it, and don't say anything. I'm still a little sore from that, by the way. As we've said many times today, storms are coming. They're inevitable. And here's actually, we got a picture of what a storm in the Mediterranean looks like today. It's what it would have looked like back then. Throw this picture up. That is what's called a shelf cloud, okay? And the Mediterranean is very similar to kind of the Midwest in terms of how storms form, okay? So in the Midwest, you get the warm air of the Gulf blowing up. You get the cold air of Canada coming down, right? They meet and they create these shelf clouds. And if you're in the Midwest and you see those clouds, that means a storm is coming, right? You know it's coming. And if you see this next picture, throw the next one up, this is when a tornado is forming. So if you see this cloud, it's too late, right? You're in the middle of a storm. And here's the thing about this. We can see the storms coming. They come. They move towards us. We've got to be prepared for when they come. We've got to be able to keep our head and our cool in the middle of stormy seasons because they're coming no matter what. And you got to ask yourself the question, in the middle of the storm, it might rip away my finances. It might rip away my possessions. It might rip away my job, whether by choice or circumstance or bad decisions. But the storm can't dictate how you will act in the middle of it. These last few chapters of Acts have all been about Paul's character in the hardest moments and how he has stayed true to that. You have to ask yourself the question, am I able to keep my head in the middle of the storm? Does my character stay true? Am I able to trust in God no matter whether you see him working or you're still trying to find him because you're in the middle of it? The truth about storms is this. The bad news is that they're going to come. The good news is that they don't last forever. In my office, I have a picture hanging on my wall. In fact, I have a picture of it right now. It's a couple buffalo going through a storm. And there it is. And I heard this analogy a couple months ago. And I thought, this is absolutely fantastic. I need this on my wall. Somebody was telling me the story. They said, listen, when those storms blow in the Midwest, when those shelf clouds start moving in, cows will see the storm and they will run and they will try to hide and they try to avoid the storm as long as they can. And they said, but buffalo are different. Buffalo see the storm coming. They put their head down, and they go straight into the storm. Because buffalo have discovered that if I go straight into the storm and hold my composure and push through, I'm actually going to spend less time in the middle of it than if I try to run or find an easier way out. And so the cows actually spend more time in the worst part of the storm, that cold front edge that's just brutal and destroying them, while the buffalo are the ones who get through the other side. And that's my encouragement for you today. Wherever you find yourself right now, can you be like the buffalo? Can you keep your head down and move through the storm, right? Keeping your composure and your character and ultimately your trust in God no matter what you are going through. And can you trust that even when you're in the middle of that, if you've ever been in the middle of a snowstorm, by the way, you can look all around you and go, there is no way out. I can see 10 feet in that direction and 10 feet in that direction, and I have no idea what is going on. Can you trust that in the middle where you can't see the end, that God's got you? He's there with you, and he'll get you through that storm. Would you guys pray with me? Lord God, we pray today, no matter where we find ourselves. God, in the middle of storms, maybe some of us are coming out of a really difficult season. God, we're feeling like we're just beat up and bruised and battered down. Some of us might feel like we are just entering into a storm. We're looking, going, how am I ever going to see the end of this? And God, I pray that no matter where we find ourselves, we'd be able to put our trust in you. To know that you are the God of the universe who loves us and cares for us. And even in those darkest and most difficult moments, we're not alone. You're the God of comfort. You're the God of care, the God of direction. You're the God that makes a way. Even when it feels like there is no way out for us, God, you do that. So Lord, help us today know, God, that you are the way maker. Even when we don't see it, God, you are working in our lives. And Lord, today we put our trust and our hope in you and you alone. We pray all this in your son's name. Amen. Would you all stand? We're going to sing this song, Waymaker, together. May it be just a call and a prayer from your heart about who God is in the middle of the storms of your life. Let's worship together.